I never thought the wilderness would become the place where my life would hang by the thinnest of threads. Yet there I was, broken and bleeding beneath a sky swollen with dark, angry clouds. The cold earth pressing hard against my shattered body. The fall had come without warning. A snap of a rotten branch beneath my foot, a sudden slide down the rocky slope, and then a crashing impact that stole the breath from my lungs and twisted my leg into a shape it was never meant to hold. Every movement sent sharp waves of pain through me, but it was the loneliness that gnawed deepest, the unbearable silence that followed the hurried footsteps fading away into the thicket. My companions, scared and desperate, had left me behind as if I were already dead, convinced that mercy was to abandon me to whatever fate the wild had waiting. Their retreat echoed like a sentence, a quiet verdict that I was no longer part of their story, just a burden too heavy to carry. The rain began then, slow and soft at first, then relentless, falling like needles on my skin, washing away what little warmth my body had left and soaking into the ragged tears of my dress, chilling me to the bone. The sky seemed to mourn with me, weeping in sheets of gray that blurred the line between earth and heaven, as thunder rumbled a distant warning. I tried to lift my head, to call out, but my voice was gone, stolen by the cold and fear that tightened around my throat like a cruel noose. Each breath was a fight, shallow and ragged, a fragile thread tethering me to this world as darkness began to creep behind my eyelids. I felt the blood seep through my fingers where they pressed against the torn skin of my side, sticky warmth that belied the cold creeping into my limbs. Despite the pain, despite the betrayal, a stubborn ember of will burned within me, a quiet refusal to give in to the unforgiving silence of the forest. Memories flickered like firelight in my mind. The laughter of better days, the faces of those I loved, the promise of a future I had once believed was mine to shape. Those memories were a lifeline, pulling me back from the brink, whispering that I was not yet finished. The wind whipped through the trees, carrying with it the scent of pine and earth, sharp and alive, a reminder that life persisted beyond this dark moment. Somewhere in the distance, perhaps beyond the storm's fury, I dared to believe that someone would come, a stranger, a friend, a miracle born on the wings of fate to find me lying broken and bleeding, and to carry me back from the edge of oblivion. The cold seeped deeper, and the shadows lengthened, but even as the wild threatened to claim me, I held fast to that fragile hope, fighting against the darkness, refusing to be forgotten beneath the storm-dark sky. I was not ready to die, not yet. The forest had long been my refuge, a place where silence spoke louder than words, and the weight of loss could be measured in the cold bite of winter wind or the crackle of a dying fire. But that evening, as the sun dipped beneath the jagged horizon, I stumbled on something that shifted the quiet rhythm of my world. Her. Clara Bennett, lying broken and bleeding among the tangled roots and fallen leaves, her sharp green eyes dimmed, but still fighting the dark, a flicker of stubborn life that refused to be snuffed out. The moment I saw her, every instinct screamed to turn away, to leave her to the merciless wild that had already claimed so much from me. Yet the man I had been hardened by solitude and grief could not ignore the fragile humanity before him. I knelt beside her, feeling the uneven pulse of her heart beneath torn clothes stained with dirt and blood, her broken leg twisted cruelly beneath her like a snapped branch in the wind. The air grew colder, shadows deepening as night crept over the forest floor, yet despite the chill, her presence sparked a fire inside me, a sense of purpose that had been absent for too long. Gently, I lifted her weight, a careful balance of strength and caution, knowing every movement could bring agony or worse. The forest seemed to hold its breath as I carried her through the underbrush, the scent of pine and damp earth mingling with the sharp, metallic tang of her wounds. My cabin was miles away, a lonely outpost nestled between towering firs and whispering pines, a place of solitude where the world's harsh judgments fell silent. But tonight it would become her sanctuary, a cradle for a fragile hope born from desperation. As the trees thinned and the roof came into view, I felt a flicker of something I had long buried: compassion, perhaps even the first stirring of a bond that would defy the wilderness itself. I laid her gently on the rough wooden floorboards, removing the torn remnants of her clothing to examine wounds I knew would need tending beyond mere bandages. The flickering fire cast long shadows across her pale face, highlighting the sharpness of her cheekbones and the determined set of her jaw. A woman not yet ready to surrender to the cruel fate had dealt her. My hands, steady from years of trapping and surviving, worked quickly to staunch bleeding, the coarse fabric of my shirt serving as a makeshift bandage, while outside, the forest settled into a hush, broken only by the distant call of an owl and the soft rustle of wind through the branches. In that moment, the loneliness I had accepted as my lot felt less suffocating, replaced by a quiet resolve to see her through this night and whatever battles lay beyond. The wild could be cruel, unforgiving, and indifferent, but here in this cabin, beneath the weight of 1,000 stars, I made a silent promise to this broken woman who fate had cast into my path. I would not let the darkness claim her yet. The first thing I noticed when I woke was the soft glow of firelight flickering against the rough wooden walls, and the sharp, comforting scent of pine that filled the cramped cabin like a breath of life. A stark contrast to the cold, wet wilderness that had been my only companion for so many hours. Pain radiated from my side, and the dull ache in my broken arm reminded me that I was still alive, still here, though barely. And beside me, Elias moved with a quiet certainty that spoke of years spent tending to wounds both of body and spirit, his hands steady as he cleaned the fresh blood from my side. Using water warmed over the fire and rough linen strips to bandage the ragged gash, his gruff voice low and clipped as he gave simple instructions and offered no false comforts, which suited me better than hollow sympathy. Because I was stubborn and proud, even in my weakness, unwilling to be reduced to a helpless thing despite the pain that gnawed at my every breath. Outside, the storm howled its fury, rain lashing the cabin like nature's wrath unleashed, wind rattling the shutters and bending the trees as if trying to tear them from the earth. But inside the walls of this humble refuge, time seemed to slow. The chaos of the storm held at bay by the fragile warmth of the hearth, and the unspoken understanding growing between two souls who had tasted loss and found in each other a sliver of hope. Elias fashioned a makeshift splint for my arm from a crooked branch and strips of cloth, his hands sure despite their roughness, and I watched him work with an odd mix of gratitude and defiance, knowing that survival was a battle of wills as much as of flesh. And even though I was broken, I was not yet broken enough to surrender. We spoke little, words unnecessary, or perhaps too heavy for that small, firelit room where shadows danced like ghosts on the walls. But in the quiet moments between the creaks of settling wood and the crackle of flames, there was a connection, fragile and tentative, like the first buds of spring pushing through winter's frost. I saw in Elias's eyes a reflection of my own scars, wounds not just on skin but etched deep into the soul, and in that shared pain, an unspoken promise that neither of us was truly alone anymore, that this cabin, battered by storms and solitude, had become a sanctuary, not only for my battered body, but for two broken spirits seeking redemption in the wilderness. As night deepened and the storm raged on, I closed my eyes, feeling the steady rhythm of Elias's breath nearby and the pulse of life within me, fragile but enduring, and for the first time since the fall, a glimmer of something like peace stirred amid the wreckage of my shattered existence. The days slipped by like the slow turning of a weathered page, marked not by words, but by the steady rhythm of survival and the quiet unfolding of trust between two souls stitched together by pain and necessity. I lay wrapped in coarse blankets woven from Elias's own hands, my body slowly mending beneath the steady watch of a man whose rugged exterior barely concealed the depth of his scars, scars not carved by nature's hand, but by loss and solitude that had lingered long before I stumbled into his life. Outside the cabin, Elias vanished into the forest each dawn, his figure a shadow among the towering pines, returning with the fruits of the wild fresh game, roots, and berries, while I gathered strength from the gentle pulse of the fire and the steady beating of my own heart, hesitant but alive, still raw from wounds unseen, as much as those that marred my skin. The silence between us was thick, but not empty, filled instead with the weight of stories left untold, memories buried beneath the surface like stones beneath a riverbed, waiting to be uncovered by time and quiet courage. In the stillness, my mind drifted to a life once promised, a future sketched in delicate lines that had crumbled like dry earth beneath a harsh sun, the engagement that had ended in betrayal, the faces of those who had turned away when I needed them most, leaving me to carry the bruises of rejection alongside those of my fall. Elias's own past came into focus like faded photographs, shared in glances, and the way his hands trembled ever so slightly when he thought no one watched, revealing the hollow ache left by a wife stolen away by the relentless grip of illness, a grief carried silently through endless winters. Despite our separate shadows, we found in each other a fragile refuge, two broken pieces pressed together by circumstance and quiet understanding, neither of us offering false promises or easy answers, but simply bearing witness to the other's pain. It was, in the unspoken moments, the way Elias's eyes softened when they met mine, the careful attentiveness in his touch as he tended to my wounds, the warmth that seeped into the cold corners of my heart, that a tentative trust began to bloom, fragile yet resilient, like the first green shoots pushing through winter's frozen ground. We shared no grand declarations or fleeting comforts, only the steady presence of two survivors who, in the vast wilderness of loss and betrayal, discovered that even the quietest companionship could become a lifeline. And as the sun filtered through the cabin's rough window panes, casting golden patterns on splintered floorboards, I realized that healing was not just a matter of mending flesh, but of finding solace in a shared silence that spoke louder than any words ever could, a connection forged not in spoken promises, but in the steady, enduring act of simply being there, together. The night had fallen like a velvet shroud over the dense forest, the sky above a black canvas studded with cold, distant stars that barely pierced the thick canopy of trees, and the world around us seemed to hold its breath, the usual chorus of woodland creatures silenced beneath an ominous stillness that unsettled my every nerve. It was then that the haunting, mournful howls began, long, wavering cries that sliced through the darkness like a ghostly lament, the call of wolves moving unseen but felt in the very marrow of the earth, a reminder that the wilderness was a place where mercy was rare and danger ever present. Elias, who had become my protector and reluctant guardian in this wild, unforgiving place, stirred beside me, his eyes sharp and alert, despite the weariness etched in every line of his weathered face, the kind of alertness born from years spent walking a thin line between survival and oblivion. Without a word, he rose and moved to the cabin's narrow window, pressing his hands against the cold glass as he scanned the shadowy forest beyond, every muscle coiled and ready like a panther, waiting for the moment to strike. his presence radiating a fierce determination that made the cabin feel less fragile against the vast unknown beyond its walls. I watched him, the firelight flickering in his dark eyes, and felt a surge of admiration and something more delicate stirring in the depths of my bruised heart. A fragile hope that perhaps, even in a world so harsh and indifferent, there was room for protection, for courage, and for a bond forged in the face of peril. The howls grew closer, a chorus that seemed to weave around the cabin like a living thing, the wolves circling in the darkness. Unseen but unmistakably near, their presence a stark reminder that this sanctuary was only a temporary refuge against the relentless wild. Elias did not flinch or hesitate. Instead, he reached for his rifle, the worn wood cool beneath his fingers. A steady anchor amid the swirling tension that filled the cramped room. His movements were deliberate and quiet, honed by countless nights spent fending off threats both animal and human, and I felt the weight of his silent vow to keep me safe, to stand between me and the teeth of the wilderness, no matter the cost. As he positioned himself near the door, his silhouette a dark sentinel against the flickering firelight, I could not help but sense the fragile thread that tethered us both to this moment, two survivors, bound by circumstance and growing trust, facing a darkness that was both external and internal. Beneath the howl of the wolves, I heard the steady beat of my own heart, steadying itself against fear and fatigue, and in that sound I found a small beacon of strength. The wild was ruthless, unforgiving, and sometimes cruel, but in Elias's fierce watchfulness I glimpsed a quiet promise that even the loneliest souls could find sanctuary in the steadfastness of another. And as the wolves prowled the night beyond our fragile walls, a flicker of hope ignited within me, a hope as fragile and precious as the dying embers of our fire, but powerful enough to keep the darkness at bay for one more night. The morning dawned pale and quiet, the heavy mist curling like ghostly fingers through the trees, and for a fleeting moment the cabin felt like an island of stillness, a fragile sanctuary in a world that had turned its back on me long ago. But that fragile peace shattered when footsteps approached along the narrow forest path, deliberate and uncertain, carrying with them the weight of past betrayals and fractured loyalties. And when Elias opened the door, I recognized the weary figure of Thomas, one of the men who had once traveled with us, his eyes haunted by the ghosts of guilt and regret that seemed to trail him like a shadow. He brought news that struck me like a cold wind. Our group, convinced that I had been claimed by the wilderness, was preparing to leave the area, to cut their losses and move on as if I had never existed, abandoning me not once but twice, first to the unforgiving wild, then to oblivion within the hearts of those who had called themselves friends. My anger flared like wildfire, scorching the fragile hope that had begun to take root in my heart. Fury burning through the exhaustion and pain, a fierce refusal to be erased or forgotten. Elias stood beside me, his presence a quiet anchor in the storm of emotions, his eyes steady and unwavering as he met Thomas's gaze, and in a voice low and certain, he made a promise that settled over the room like a shield. "You're not going anywhere without me," he said, the weight of those words carrying a power that neither of us could deny. Together, we formed an unspoken pact, a resolve forged not just from desperation, but from a growing strength that defied the betrayals of the past and the uncertain dangers still lurking beyond the trees. As Thomas spoke haltingly of the group's plans and the reasons behind their cold decision to abandon me, I felt the sting of each word, but also the fuel it provided to stoke the fires of justice burning within. Elias and I began to lay out a plan, a quiet strategy born from the wilderness's lessons. Survival depended on patience, vigilance, and an unyielding will to see the truth revealed, and those who had wronged me held accountable. The weight of the past pressed against me like a storm cloud. But in Elias's steady gaze and the unspoken bond that had grown between us, I found the courage to face whatever came next, knowing that I was no longer alone. The forest outside whispered of secrets yet uncovered, and dangers still waiting in the shadows. But within the cabin's worn walls, hope and determination mingled with the scent of pine and smoke, a promise that this time I would fight not just to survive, but to reclaim my story and demand the justice that had been denied. And as Thomas turned back toward the wilderness he had come from, I felt a flicker of something stronger than fear, an ember of resolve that would not be extinguished until the wrongs were righted and the past could no longer cast its long, dark shadow over my future. The days grew longer, and the wilderness began to feel less like a prison and more like a place where life could stretch its thin fingers towards something new and uncertain. And I found myself shadowing Elias on his hunts, moving through the forest with a tentative grace, learning to read the language of rustling leaves and snapping twigs, the subtle signs that spoke of game nearby and danger lurking just beyond sight. Each step a quiet lesson in survival, whispered by the ancient trees. Elias was a patient teacher, his eyes always watchful, his hands steady as he showed me how to move without sound, how to honor the land, and take only what was needed. And in those moments, the walls I had built around my bruised heart began to crumble, softened by the rhythm of the wild, and the steady presence of a man who carried his own shadows, yet welcomed mine without judgment. Our conversations, once sparse and cautious, deepened in the flickering light of campfires and under the endless sky, revealing dreams that had long been buried beneath the weight of pain and loss. Fears that clung to us like the cold mist that settled in the valleys at dawn, and the fragile threads of a new family weaving themselves between us with a quiet but undeniable strength. Elias spoke seldom of his past, but when he did, his voice was low and rough, with memories of a love lost to sickness, a grief that had shaped the man he was but had not broken him, and I shared in turn the wounds left by betrayal and abandonment. The shattered promises that had once threatened to define me. There was a delicate balance in our growing trust, a dance of vulnerability and guarded hope that neither of us dared to name aloud for fear of shattering what had taken root. Then one evening, as the sun bled crimson behind the mountains and the forest whispered secrets through the rustling leaves, Elias reached out and called me wife, the word soft and certain, carrying a weight of belonging that startled us both, a seed planted in the fertile soil of our shared solitude, promising something I had thought lost forever, a place to call home, a bond that transcended the scars we carried. In that moment, beneath the vast sky and the watchful eyes of the ancient trees, I felt the fragile bloom of hope unfurling within me, delicate yet fierce, a testament to the healing power of trust and the possibility of love born not from grand gestures, but from quiet presence and unwavering commitment. The wilderness around us seemed to hold its breath in reverence, and I knew that whatever storms lay ahead, we would face them not as two broken souls adrift, but as a family forged in the crucible of survival and quiet, steadfast love. The quiet that had settled over our fragile sanctuary was shattered by the creeping knowledge that danger was no longer confined to the merciless wilderness, for word had reached me like a bitter wind whispered through the trees. Men with cold eyes and merciless intent were closing in, a band of ruthless bounty hunters sent by those who had once traveled with me, determined that I would never walk the path back to civilization, their purpose as clear and cruel as the jagged rocks that scarred the riverbed. Elias was the first to sense the change. His keen instincts, honed by years of solitary living, reading the subtle signs, the broken branches that were not the work of animals, the faint, distant sound of hooves stirring the underbrush, and the way the birds fell silent as if holding their breath in fearful anticipation. Together we prepared, not just to survive the bite of nature, but to face a threat born of human greed and malice. A confrontation that would demand every ounce of our courage, skill, and trust in each other. Inside the cabin, the air was thick with tension, the scent of pine and smoke mingling with the sharper, acrid edge of fear and determination as we checked weapons, sharpened blades, and steeled ourselves for the inevitable storm beyond the wooden walls. My heart pounded with a mix of dread and fierce resolve, the memories of betrayal and abandonment fueling a burning need to protect the fragile life we had begun to build. And in Elias's steady gaze, I found a quiet promise that we would face whatever came together, without flinching or faltering. As the shadows lengthened and night crept closer, the first sounds of the hunter's approach echoed through the trees. Low voices carried on the wind, the clatter of gear, and the unmistakable rhythm of boots and horses, moving with cold purpose toward our door. Elias stood like a rock beside me, his rough hands steady as he loaded his rifle one last time, while I drew upon the hard-won strength that had seen me through broken bones and broken hearts, ready to fight not just for survival, but for the right to reclaim my life and dignity. The wilderness had taught us patience and vigilance, but it was now clear that our survival depended on more than silent footsteps and hidden paths. It required the courage to face the darkness within human souls, to meet cruelty with fierce defiance, and to hold fast to the fragile light of hope burning between us. As the hunters closed in, the cabin seemed to shrink around us, becoming both a fortress and a crucible, where our bond would be tested against the harshest of fires. And despite the fear that clutched at my throat, I knew that with Elias beside me, I was no longer the broken woman left for dead, but a force awakened by the wild, ready to stand and fight for a future stolen but never surrendered. The twilight wrapped the forest in a deepening cloak of shadows, as the first cries and the sharp clang of weapons shattered the fragile quiet of our cabin, signaling the arrival of the hunters with their cold eyes and deadly intent. And in that moment, every instinct sharpened into a razor's edge, as Elias and I moved with a desperate grace born of survival and fierce determination. He was the steady force, his hands sure and movements precise as he fired with a calm born of countless battles fought alone in the wilderness. While I drew from a well of courage I had barely known I possessed, my heart pounding not just with fear, but with the unyielding will to protect the life we had begun to build together, to claim the right to exist beyond the shadows of those who sought to erase me. The cabin became a battleground, every creak of wood and shatter of glass a reminder that this fight was not just against men, but against the betrayals and wounds that had brought me here. And though pain flared sharply as a bullet grazed my side, and the sting of exhaustion threatened to drag me under, I pressed on, fueled by the steady presence of Elias beside me and the fierce fire burning in my veins. The hunters advanced with ruthless intent, their voices sharp and commands cold as steel. But we were no longer the broken souls they had expected to find abandoned and helpless. We were a force forged in the crucible of the wild, our bond a shield stronger than any weapon they carried. Every shot Elias fired echoed like a heartbeat of defiance. Every move I made a testament to the will that had refused to be crushed, and in the chaos, the cabin itself seemed to hold its breath, the flickering firelight casting long, dancing shadows that bore witness to our stand. As the tide of the battle turned, the hunters faltered, their confidence cracked by the unexpected strength of two survivors who refused to surrender, and when the last of them retreated into the dark forest, nursing wounds and bruised pride, Elias and I sank to the floor, our bodies battered, but our spirits unbroken. In the quiet aftermath, as the stars emerged like scattered diamonds against the velvet sky, I felt a profound shift within me, a realization that transcended the simple title we had exchanged. Elias called me his wife, not just in words, but in the unspoken promise of shared survival and unwavering loyalty. A bond that had been tempered in fire and shadow, and now stood as unbreakable as the ancient trees surrounding us. I embraced that truth fully. No longer the fragile woman left to die, but a partner, a fighter, and a survivor whose place was beside him, grounded in the fierce love and hard-earned trust that had blossomed amidst the wilderness and the storm. A testament that even in the darkest nights, the human heart could forge light powerful enough to overcome any darkness. The morning after the battle was thick with silence, broken only by the soft rustle of leaves stirred by a hesitant breeze, and the distant call of a lone hawk circling above. As Elias and I stepped cautiously into the hunter's abandoned camp, a grim testament to the bitter violence of the night before. The charred remains of a fire, smoldering like the lingering embers of betrayal and secrets yet to be uncovered. The ground was littered with discarded weapons, torn fabric, and scattered papers that whispered of the darker truths hidden beneath the surface of the wilderness that had both sheltered and threatened me. And as we sifted through the wreckage with careful hands and sharp eyes, I felt the weight of a new kind of reckoning settling upon my shoulders. Elias moved methodically, his weathered fingers brushing aside dirt and ash to reveal letters sealed with wax and ledgers marked with meticulous care, documents that spoke of a calculated betrayal, born of jealousy, greed, and the cold cruelty of those who saw me not as a woman struggling for life, but as a threat to be extinguished. The words, in those faded pages, cut through the haze of my memories like a blade, unraveling the tangled web of lies spun by a rival whose envy had festered into a conspiracy so dark that it had cost me not only my safety, but the trust of those I once called companions. As Elias read aloud passages that named names and traced the flow of money and deceit, a fierce fire ignited within me, transforming the fear and pain that had long defined my existence into a resolute determination to reclaim not just my life, but my dignity and agency. The forest around us seemed to hold its breath as the truth emerged from the ashes, a brutal illumination that cast long shadows over the past, but also carved a path forward, a way out of the wilderness of abandonment and into a future where I would no longer be silenced or erased. Elias's presence was a steady anchor in the storm of revelations, his unwavering gaze offering not just comfort, but a shared resolve to see justice served, and in that moment, I knew that the battle we had fought was only the beginning of a larger war, not one waged with rifles and fists, but with courage, truth, and the unyielding will to rise from the ruins. The weight of the past pressed upon us, heavy and unrelenting, but it no longer crushed my spirit. Instead, it became the foundation upon which I would build my new life, a life defined by strength, resilience, and the fierce refusal to be a victim any longer. As we gathered the documents and prepared to leave the shattered camp behind, the forest around us seemed to pulse with a quiet promise, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, the seeds of renewal could take root and bloom, and I carried that promise with me, a beacon to guide me through the uncertain road ahead, ready to face whatever trials awaited, with the unshakable determination of a woman who had been lost but was now found, and who would never again be left to die in the shadows. The morning mist clung to the pines as Elias helped me steady my steps, the long road back to the nearest settlement stretching ahead like a fragile promise that shimmered with uncertainty, each mile marked by the ache in my wounded side and the steady pulse of healing beneath bruised skin. The journey was slow, a measured pace, born of careful balance between endurance and caution. The wilderness around us, both a constant reminder of the trials we had faced, and a silent witness to the fragile hope growing between two souls who had once been broken, but now found strength in shared struggle. Elias's hand was a steadying presence at my back, his rough fingers entwined with mine in quiet reassurance as we navigated winding trails blanketed with fallen leaves and whispered secrets of seasons past. The rhythm of our footsteps echoing a new harmony forged in the space between pain and possibility. The air was crisp with the scent of earth and pine, sharp and invigorating as sunlight filtered through the canopy, casting dappled patterns on the forest floor that danced like fleeting memories, a reminder that life was a fragile dance between darkness and light, loss and renewal. Each evening, we made camp beneath a sky washed in stars, the crackling fire, a beacon against the vast silence. And in those moments of warmth and quiet, our conversations deepened, shedding the guarded walls that had once encased us in loneliness, revealing dreams once buried beneath the weight of despair, and fears slowly softened by trust. I told Elias of the life I had left behind, the shattered engagements, the betrayals that had broken my heart and nearly shattered my will to live, and he shared in turn the shadows that had haunted his past, the loss of a love stolen by sickness, and the cold grip of grief that had shaped his solitary existence. In the shared space between those stories, our bond grew stronger, a tender thread weaving through the wilderness, binding us in a quiet promise that transcended words. There were days when the pain threatened to overwhelm me, when the memories clawed at the edges of my mind like winter's chill. But Elias's unwavering presence was a steady flame, a refuge where I could lay down my burdens and find solace. With every step toward home, I felt the fragile bloom of something new, a love born not from grand declarations or fleeting passion, but from the steady, enduring act of walking side by side through the darkest woods and into the light. The wilderness had taught me resilience, patience, and the power of hope. And as we finally glimpsed the outlines of the settlement against the horizon, my heart swelled with a mixture of relief and anticipation, knowing that the journey ahead would not be easy, but that with Elias by my side, I was ready to face whatever storms awaited. In the wildest places where survival was a daily battle, we had discovered that love and partnership could thrive, a testament to the unyielding strength of the human spirit and the quiet miracles born from shared courage and trust. The day I returned to town was heavy with the weight of unspoken judgments and whispered rumors that clung to me like a stubborn shadow, the same place that had once been my home now feeling unfamiliar and cold, as if the very air carried the echoes of betrayal and abandonment that had marked my fall and near death in the wilderness. Walking through the dusty streets, every glance felt like a weight pressing against my chest. Some eyes filled with suspicion, others with barely concealed scorn, as if my survival was a challenge to their assumptions and a reminder of the secrets they had hoped to bury along with me. But I was no longer the broken woman they had left behind, and with Elias steady at my side, a quiet pillar of strength whose presence alone seemed to command a wary respect, I faced the crowd with a determination that refused to be dimmed by their cold stares or whispered doubts. Confronting those who had abandoned me, their faces etched with guilt thinly veiled by defensiveness, I spoke with a voice tempered by the fires of survival and the steel of resilience, telling the story of that brutal night in the wild, the pain and betrayal, but also the fierce will that had refused to let me die alone. Public opinion, once a wall built of silence and suspicion, began to crack as my truth took root in the hearts of those who had listened. A slow but steady shift from condemnation to reluctant admiration for the woman who had clawed her way back from the edge of death and returned not just alive, but unbowed. Elias never spoke much in the heated exchanges that followed, but his steady gaze and protective stance beside me were louder than any words, a reminder that I was no longer isolated in my fight, that together we formed a united front against the tides of judgment and resentment. The painful reminders of betrayal surfaced like jagged stones beneath calm water's old accusations, whispered doubts, and the sting of rejection from faces I had once trusted, but each was met with a quiet but unwavering resolve that grew stronger with every passing hour. The town, once a place of abandonment, slowly became a battleground for my reclamation, and with Elias's support, I navigated the shifting currents of hostility and skepticism, finding allies in unexpected places and drawing strength from the knowledge that survival was more than a physical act. It was a reclamation of self and story. As I stood before the crowd, the firelight of determination burning bright in my eyes, I realized that this was more than a return. It was a rebirth, a declaration that I would no longer be defined by their abandonment, but by the fierce light of my resilience and the steadfast love that had carried me through the darkest nights. And though the road ahead would be fraught with trials and painful reckonings, I faced it with Elias's hand in mine, and the unshakable belief that together we could turn judgment into justice and betrayal into a foundation for a new beginning. The day the truth finally came to light was like a thunderclap breaking through a long, oppressive silence, a reckoning that rippled through the community with a force no one could ignore. And as the names of those who had betrayed me were read aloud in the dim light of the courthouse, I felt a fierce surge of vindication that burned away years of doubt and fear. The very people who had once turned their backs on me now faced the harsh consequences of their treachery legal judgments that stripped them of status and property, social exile that left them isolated in the town that had once been theirs to command, and a collective acknowledgement that justice, though slow and painful, would not be denied. I stood tall amid the whispers and sidelong glances, no longer the broken woman left to die in the wild, but a force reborn from fire and survival, my spirit tempered and unyielding, a living testament to the power of resilience. Elias, once seen merely as a rugged trapper of the forest, emerged beside me. As more than a man who lived by the rhythms of the land, he was my husband, my steadfast protector, and my partner in a fight that had taken us beyond the edges of wilderness and betrayal into the realm of justice and redemption. Together, we navigated the complex currents of restitution and rebuilding, mending not only our lives but the fractured bonds of a community forced to reckon with its own failures. The court's gavel echoed like a final heartbeat against the walls, signaling a new chapter for all of us. And though wounds remained, the foundation of truth laid that day promised healing and a future reclaimed from the shadows of the past. As the sun set behind the familiar hills, casting long golden rays over the town square where I once felt invisible, I felt the weight of transformation settle deep within me. No longer a victim of circumstance, but a woman shaped by the wilderness's trials and the fierce love that had guided me through the darkest nights. Elias's hand in mine was a quiet reminder that redemption was not given lightly, but earned through courage and unwavering loyalty, and that together we had forged a bond unbreakable by the cruelty of others or the hardships of life. The community, once fractured by fear and silence, began to see us not as outsiders, but as pillars of strength and truth. And in that recognition lay the most profound justice of all, the reclaiming of dignity and belonging. And as I looked out over the faces of those who now greeted me with respect rather than suspicion, I knew that this was not just a victory for me, but a testament to the enduring power of hope, resilience, and the quiet courage it takes to stand tall when the world seeks to knock you down, a legacy I would carry forward with Elias by my side. Forever my husband, protector, and the steady heart that anchored me through it all. Together, Elias and I carved out a new life from the tangled wilds and the dusty edges of the settlement, weaving the lessons of the forest into the fabric of a home that stood as both refuge and declaration, a place where the harshness of the past met the promise of renewal. We found an old homestead, long abandoned and swallowed by weeds and wildflowers, its weathered timbers whispering stories of those who had come before, and with patient hands and determined hearts, we set about restoring it. Blending the rugged survival skills Elias had honed over decades with the quiet rhythms of community life that I was learning to embrace again. Each day brought its own trials, the heavy labor of rebuilding walls and roofs, the careful tending of a small garden that slowly took root beneath our fingers, the rhythmic dance of chores, and shared meals that transformed two solitary survivors into a family bound not just by marriage, but by the shared scars and healing we carried. Our marriage, forged in the crucible of hardship and tempered by the steady fire of mutual respect and quiet affection, became a beacon to those who had been cast aside by misfortune or betrayal, a living testament to the power of resilience and love, born not from grand gestures, but from the steady acts of presence and care. Neighbors who had once regarded us with wary eyes began to see us in a new light, drawn not only by the strength of our bond, but by the example we set of healing and hope. In a world too often marked by loss and division, children played in the shade of the tall pines surrounding our homestead, their laughter ringing like a balm over the scars of the past, and elders nodded with quiet approval at the sight of two souls who had found each other and built something enduring. The wilderness still whispered beyond the fields and fences, a reminder of the harshness that had shaped us, but within the walls of our home there was warmth and laughter, and the steady pulse of life reclaimed. Elias, once a solitary trapper, found joy not only in the land, but in the community we nurtured together, his eyes brightening with each new seed planted and every neighbor's smile that greeted us on the road. I, too, grew in ways I had not dared to imagine during those long nights alone, my heart healing beneath the quiet constancy of love and the hard-won peace of belonging. The road had been long and fraught with shadow, but as we stood side by side on our porch, watching the sun set in a sky painted with gold and crimson, I knew that this new beginning was more than just a home. It was a promise kept, a future reclaimed from the wilderness, and a testament that even the most broken can rise and build something beautiful together. Years have passed since the wild first claimed me as its reluctant child, and as I sit here with Elias's weathered hand wrapped firmly around mine, watching our children laugh and run beneath a sky so vast it seems to hold every hope and every sorrow of a lifetime, I find myself tracing the long, winding journey from the desperate, broken woman left to die in the wilderness to the woman I am now whole, fierce, and unyielding in her claim to life and love. The memories come unbidden like old ghosts, some sharp and jagged with pain, the bitter sting of betrayal, when I was abandoned by those who should have stood by me, the cold, unrelenting nights spent clinging to the fragile thread between life and death, the raw ache of wounds both seen and unseen. But alongside those shadows are the bright moments that saved me, Elias's steady presence like an anchor in a storm, the quiet strength we found in each other when the world had turned its back, and the slow, painful rebuilding of trust and hope. The wilderness that once threatened to consume me became instead a harsh teacher, its lessons written in the language of survival and mercy, showing me that courage is not the absence of fear, but the will to rise in spite of it, that love is the quiet power that binds shattered souls into something unbreakable, and that mercy is the force that can transform even the darkest night into the dawn of something new. I see now that being left to die was not an end, but a beginning, a fierce and remarkable beginning, born from the ashes of despair and forged in the fire of unyielding spirit. Elias's eyes meet mine, reflecting the same history etched into the lines of his face, the losses, the battles, the victories, both quiet and grand, and in that shared glance is the promise of all we have endured and all we still hold dear. The children's laughter floats on the wind, innocent and bright, a living testament to the life we have built together, a life shaped by hardship, but overflowing with joy and possibility. The wild has not defeated me. It has made me, teaching me to stand tall like the ancient trees, that weather every storm yet remain rooted deep and strong. And as the sun dips low, painting the horizon in hues of gold and crimson, I understand that my story is not just one of survival, but of transformation, a quiet victory carved from the wilderness itself, a proof that even in the darkest places, light can grow and life can flourish. This is my legacy, a testament to the power of mercy, the courage to love, and the unbreakable bond forged in the wild, a promise that sometimes, when you are left to die, you are really being given the chance to begin a life more extraordinary than you ever imagined.